Woodcraft since 1928, providing traditional and modern woodworking tools and supplies to generations of craftsmen. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.
Well, hello. Come on in. My name is Rick Butz, and welcome to wood carving. I was just putting some finishing details on this relief carving, and it occurred to me that even though I've been carving for over 20 years, whenever I pick up my tools, there's still that same feeling of magic and excitement. There's just a real special feeling about wood carving. Just what is it about the simple act of taking up a few tools and shaping a piece of wood that gives an almost magical feeling? Well, I'm not sure it's something I can put into words, but you're going to have a chance to find this out for yourself. In the next few weeks, I'll be showing you the tools, the techniques, everything you need to know so that you can experience the enjoyment of wood carving for yourself. I'll show you how to take a pocket knife or a small knife like this and whittle out a character. This person is detailed from an old photograph dating back to the 1800s. His name was French Louis. And he was a hermit in the Adirondack Mountains, and quite an interesting character. We'll also do realistic wildlife, like this chickadee. They're really neat little birds. They come to my bird feeder outside my window all winter long, and they're very friendly. I also do decoy carvings, like this loon. Magnificent birds. I'll also be showing you a very old style of carving called chip carving. And we'll use it to make this Swiss-style breadboard. This is all carved with just a single knife, and I think you'll be amazed to find this a lot easier than it first appears. We'll also be visiting the blacksmith at Cooperstown and learning how to make tools. We'll visit a modern pocket knife factory and see how they still make jackknives. Another thing I think you'll enjoy is we'll be visiting the Shelburne Museum in Vermont. We'll look at their fine collection of early American eagles. Then we'll come back to my shop, and I'll show you how to make this reproduction of a John Bellamy-style eagle using the same patterns and tools and techniques that this master carver used back in the 1800s. What's really neat about wood carving is so much of it can be done with just a few tools. A single knife is really all you need to get started, but one of the limitations with a knife is it can't scoop away wood. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today, relief carving or two-dimensional carving. This is the project I was working on when you came in. This is a primitive style or a country cat. This is a type of carving that you would have found in a lot of rural areas all over the world, done with just a couple of tools and a softwood like pine. And it's really a very interesting type of carving. The first thing you need to do in getting started with a carving like this is you've got to have a pattern. And this is the pattern for our project today. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece, just a simple line drawing that you draw freehand, or you can copy it from photographs, or you even use a pattern from a book if you can find one. First thing we need to do is to transfer this down to the wood. And, oops, I better not use this piece of wood. I just noticed this has got a knot in it. Try to avoid knots wherever you can because they're very hard and they'll chip and wreck your tools. I think I've got another piece under here. This looks a little better. All clear, no knots. We'll take our pattern and I'll fasten it down with a couple pieces of tape. This tape will keep it from sliding around when we're tracing our design. Now there's a couple ways you can transfer this drawing to your wood. You can take a piece of carbon paper and lay under and then trace through it. But sometimes the carbon paper tends to be greasy and hard to clean off a soft wood like pine. Another thing that you can do is you can take a soft pencil, well, like this number 2 pencil, and rub some graphite over the back of your design, just following these outlines. Make it nice and heavy. Then when you flip that down, you can take and retrace over your lines, and this will press that graphite from the back onto your wood and leave you the nice little line to work from. I thought this might be a little faint for us today to follow, so I went ahead and just retraced over these lines a little bit heavier. First thing you want to do with your relief carving is to fasten it down to your bench. Relief carvings have to be fastened down very well. The reason for this is when you're using the gouges, you have to hold them with both hands. And you don't want to be holding it with one hand and then carving towards it with the other, because if the tool slips, well, you can have a problem. I'm going to be holding this down today with this thing called a hold fast. This is a piece of wrought iron shaped like an upside down J, and it fits in a hole in the bench. And you just tap it once or twice, and friction locks the whole thing into place. To release it, just tap it from the back and it comes free. It's a very old design. It dates back to the days of the ancient Romans, and it's still as useful now as it was then. I'll lock this down here. I'm putting a piece of wood under this metal arm, and that'll keep the wood from making a dent in my nice piece of wood. Also, this wood is handy because if I'm carving along here and the tool slips, I'm not going to dull my edge on a piece of wrought iron. The first step in doing the relief carving is called outlining, where you take the tool and cut around the edges of the drawing that you've done. To begin this with, I'm using a tool called a V-tool. And this has 2 flat sides that comes together to form a point. Because I'm working a straight line here, I can just take the mallet and drive this right through the wood. I love the way those curls come up. Now I'm starting this line across the end of it first, for a good reason. By doing these lines across the end grain first, they'll form what is known as a stop cut. What that means is the wood grain in this particular board tends to run the lengthways here. So when I'm carving along here, when I get a splinter coming up, it'll stop when it reaches that cut instead of going on through the edge of the wood where I don't want it. Let me show you what I mean. Always use a wooden mallet to drive your gouges through the wood. Don't use a metal hammer, because the metal doesn't have any give, and it'll cause the end of your handle to split. There. This mallet is made from a piece of wood called lignum vitae, which means literally tree of life. It's a very hard, dense, tropical wood, and it has very tough interlocking fibers, so it's very hard to split. It's also very heavy and heavier than water. If you drop it in water, it'll sink instead of float. It has its own natural wax, too, that makes it very water resistant, and for this reason they used to use it for propeller bearings on old ships or water wheels. I want to go a little slower here for the rest of my carving around these curves, so I'm going to power the tool by hand. This V-gouge is just sort of drawing around the lines you've done here. This outlining is important because what it does is it separates the raised portion of your carving from the background. In other words, it delineates your carving. There's really a very relaxing and soothing feel to a tool as it's sort of carving through the wood. When the wood is right and your tool is nice and sharp, it's just a very soothing feeling. Now notice what I've done here. I switched hands. Before I was holding my right hand to push the tool and steering it with my left. Now if I'm coming around the back here, I'm going to change positions. And my left hand's going to push the tool and my right's going to steer. It feels a little awkward at first, but after a little practice, it feels natural, and it's very handy because you can change directions with the tool without actually having to take your piece up and turn it around. And it's important for this section because it allows me to work with the grain back here. I know from experience that if I carve this way, my tool will cut smoothly along the back of the cat. But I know from previous experience that if I come this way, the tool is going to dig into the back here and may cause splinters to run down into the wood. This is just called working with a grain, and it's one of those things it's easier to do than it is to try and explain. It's a lot like petting a dog or a cat. One way feels good and one way doesn't. And after a while, you just develop an instinct for it. There, our outlining's done. Next thing to do is to carve away the background. To do that, I'm using a number 7 gouge that is 14 millimeters wide. Now the number 7 is called the sweep number of the tool, and that just refers to the amount of curvature of the blade. The larger the sweep number, the more curve you have. Sweep numbers vary from one tool maker to another, but generally they start out at something like, a number 2, which is almost flat, and go up to a number 11, which is almost a U-shaped. You hear that whistling sound? That's one of the ways to make sure your tool is sharp. If you hear that whistling sound as it's going through the wood, it means it's cutting the wood nice and clean. If it crunches through, then your tool needs a little more sharpening. That's roughed out. Now to smooth these tool marks down, I'm going to use a number 5. Now this tool is a little bit different. This is called a Fishtail Design. The number 5 sweep is a little flatter, and that'll give me smoother tool marks. This fishtail, as you can probably guess, it's called that because it looks like the tail of a fish. And it's handy for getting into areas like this around where you have a little tight corner that might be hard to reach with a larger tool, or one that comes flat on the sides. This tool, because it's a little flatter, will leave a smoother tool mark in the background. Give us a nice, evenly textured effect. I really like the effect that tool marks have. There's something about the texturing of a well-honed tool that it gives a kind of a pattern and a rhythm that you don't get with a perfectly smooth background. That's one of the disadvantages to using an electric router on the background. Not only does it take longer, but you don't get this nice hand-tooled effect. Also, it's very soothing and enjoyable to just be carving the tool through the wood. And when I get these little pieces here, that little fuzzies that stick up there, you just take the edge of your tool and snip those off, just like that. No problem. There's a couple more. And our background is done. There we go. Take these little guys out. Now we can get on to the fun part of actually shaping the cat itself. You notice that when I'm putting my tools over on the bench here, I keep them in the same basic order. I always like to work with the handles pointing away from me, and I keep the tools lined up so if I'm looking for a tool, I know I can reach over and grab the handle of this particular one instead of picking it up by the edge. This is especially helpful if you're doing a complex carving where you may have a dozen or so tools lined up there. If you keep them in the same order, it saves a lot of fumbling around looking for exactly the right tool that you need. The first step in doing the modeling or the rounding of the shape is to take our V tool again and carve around or outline the lines we've drawn in the middle here. This is great. It's just like drawing in the wood. You know, I find myself switching hands back and forth on this without even thinking about it after a while. Come around under his chin here. We'll give him a little bit of an ear. And we'll come up around his nose. The model for my drawing is my cat, whose name is Cinta, and she'll sit for hours, and is a very good model. She also likes to sit underneath my workbench and chase the shavings that drop down. I'll come around, give a little mouth. Okay, and the outlining is done. Now I'll take my number 5 gouge again and just start smoothing off the background here. Coming around the back of them. Take and round out his ear a little bit. Now you'll notice that on this whole carving, I've kept it very shallow. I haven't gone down any more than a quarter or an eighth of an inch. It's always amazing to find how much detail you can get on a carving like this without going real deep. Now if you wanted to make a cat that went a lot deeper, you could. But you don't have to go down a half an inch or so to get any kind of illusion of depth. There we go. Now I'll come up around here and smooth down the face a bit. This will make the eyebrows seem to appear more to the fore of the carving. Now for carving the eyes, I could take my V-gouge and incise a line around here like I did before. But let me show you another trick. I'll take my number 7 tool that I've got here, and holding it vertically, I'll make a cut here in at about 45 degrees, and then make another cut about 45 degrees to that, so it meets at the bottom. And that makes a nice little half-moon chip. I'll show you that again over here. We'll make one cut, and then make the other cut, and there's our little shaving. To do the pupil, take my V-gouge, size a line, size another line, and then take my pointed knife and just snip that chip free. Well, we're just about done with this guy. Let me show you a little trick here. I'm going to bevel this area down so it looks like this leg is being overlapped by the cat's haunch. Now that's a little trick for creating perspective or a feeling of depth in the carving without actually taking it down real far. Here, I'll do that again with this one. Come here so it looks like the back leg is being overlapped by the middle one. Come and just snip those away. So now that'll create the illusion that the tail overlaps the haunch, which overlaps this foot, which overlaps the other front paw there. And this will give us the illusion of depth with our cat, and yet we haven't taken it down very deep. This detail will show up a lot more when we stain them in just a few minutes. There, I think our cat is pretty well done here. Now from this stage, you can really do just about anything you want. You could sand it, you could paint it if you wanted. You could take the V-gouge, you could come along and texture the fur up here. Let me show you another way of texturing the fur though. We can go back to our number 7 gouge, and remember how we made that little half-moon cut around the eye? I can take and make a series of these along the side here. And then you just reverse the tool and cut them from the other side. And just make a whole row of these up and down the cat. And this will give us sort of a stylized texture of fur. Let me show you one that I was working on earlier. This is one where I've gone ahead and done this up a little farther. And you can see how it gives you sort of a little wavy motion that gives the effect of having, textured fur on the cat. This is a style of simulating fur that you see a lot in old butter molds and old carvings, things that you might find around New England or the Pennsylvania area, or in old European areas too. A very rural style. Now our cat is really done here. One of the last things you'll want to do is give it a coat of protective finish to seal the wood to protect it from moisture and keep it from getting dirty. Also, if you do it right, you can use the finish to bring out the details. Let me show you one way of doing that. Let me just clear my bench here a bit. First thing I need is some stain. And the stain is really just a pigment in a solvent, like mineral spirits or something, or turpentine. Open the top. Always resist the temptation to open the top of a can with one of your tools. Always use a screwdriver for that. It's amazing what that'll do to wreck a nice smooth edge on your tool. I'll just take a little of this. This is a medium brown stain. It's called Special Walnut. We'll just paint this right on here. Don't worry about being neat. This is a great type of finish. You can't make a mistake with it. Totally flawless. It's a lot of fun. You just slap this stuff on. It's like playing with mud. The only thing you want to do is make sure you get it into all these little details. There. The rest of that will just wipe down. Normally, when you stain something, you let it soak in for half an hour or an hour or two. But let me show you what I'm going to do here. Instead of letting this soak into the wood, I'm going to wipe it off right away. And see what happens? The stain stays in the depressions that I've made. And it creates an artificial shadow. And it really makes those details pop out. I love it. And there's our country cat. Now the one thing you want to remember when you're staining is make sure whatever you do to the front, you do to the back and the sides as well. The reason for this is the stain protects the moisture from getting into the wood. And that's good. But if the back isn't sealed, then the moisture can come and go through the back faster than it can through the front. What happens is the back is going to swell and shrink unevenly, and that'll make your board warp. So always remember, when you're doing a finish, whatever you do to the front, do to the back and the rest of it. I'd like to show you some other relief carvings here. Just take a minute. This is one done in oak. And this is a detail from an old English brass. And what I wanted to show you was, even though this design is a little different than our cat, you still follow the same basic steps. You outline around the edges of the drawing, you clear away the background, and then you do the center part. And if you do it in this various stages like that, it carves much more efficiently. It's a very, very efficient way of doing the carving with the hand tools. Here's another carving over here that's a little more elaborate yet. And this is a reproduction of a 15th century carving of St. George and the Dragon. And once again, all these background areas have been carved away and cut out before the modeling has been done. And I think you can see why in this case. You really have to get that background down so you can get into some of these areas around here. Here's another carving over here that's even a little more involved yet. It's basically the same as what we've been doing, except instead of being in a rectangular panel, the background has been cut away. We'll be doing this one a little later on, and I'll show you more about that. Well, that's really all there is to relief carving. It's really a lot of fun, and you can do so much with it. Next week, I'd like to show you how to take our knife and carve our friend here, French Louis. And I'll be showing you step by step and chip by chip how you can make French Louis for yourself. So get your whittling knife sharpened up, and until next week, this is Rick Butz wishing you happy carving.
You can continue to learn wood carving with Rick Butz with his book, How to Carve Wood. This 224-page book of challenging exercises and projects is full of detailed instructions. Lessons include whittling, wildlife carving, and relief carving. To order your copy, call 1-800-950-9648.
Woodcraft, for all your woodworking needs. Tools, supplies, lumber, project plans, and educational workshops. With a mail order catalog and stores nationwide. Woodcraft, helping you make wood work.